The mirror in the hospital bathroom reflected a woman I barely recognized. Dark circles shadowed my eyes like bruises, and my once vibrant auburn hair hung limp against shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world. At 48, I looked older than my own mother had at 60. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. "Sarah, are you in there?" My husband David's voice echoed through the bathroom door, impatient as always. "Mom's asking for her evening pills." I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar knot tighten in my chest. For 18 months, I'd been Margaret's primary caregiver, while David traveled for business. 18 months of sleepless nights, missed meals, and watching a once fierce woman slowly fade away. 18 months of being told I was selfish whenever I suggested we hire professional help. "Coming," I called back, my voice barely above a whisper. As I walked back into Margaret's room, the smell of antiseptic and uncertainty filled my nostrils. She lay propped against pillows that I'd fluffed countless times, her silver hair neatly braided, another small ritual I'd taken on. Her eyes, still sharp despite everything, followed me as I approached with her medication. "You look tired, dear," she said softly, her voice carrying that gentle wisdom that reminded me why I'd grown to love this woman so deeply. "David should be here helping you." I managed a smile as I handed her the water cup. "He's busy with work, Mom. You know how demanding his job can be." But Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd always been able to see through pretense. "Is he now?" Before I could respond, David burst through the door, his expensive cologne preceding him like an announcement. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place, and he carried himself with that confidence that had first attracted me 22 years ago. Now it just felt like armor against the world, and against me. "How's she doing today?" he asked, not really looking at either of us as he scrolled through his phone. "Better," I said automatically. "Dr. Martinez thinks the new medication is helping with the pain." "Good, good." He glanced up briefly. "I'll need to leave for Chicago tomorrow morning. That Peterson deal is heating up." My heart sank. Another business trip. Another week of managing everything alone. How long this time? Just 4 days. Maybe 5. He was already looking back at his phone, typing rapidly. "You'll be fine. You always are." That night, after Margaret had fallen asleep and David had retreated to his home office to prepare for tomorrow, I sat in our empty kitchen staring at the cold cup of tea in my hands. The house felt cavernous around me, filled with the kind of silence that echoes with unspoken truths. I'd given up my career as a marketing director to care for Margaret. I'd given up my friendships, my hobbies, my sense of self. I'd become invisible in my own life, a shadow moving through routines that served everyone but me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emma. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Coffee tomorrow?" I started to type my usual excuse about not being able to leave Margaret, then stopped. When was the last time I'd done something just for me? When was the last time I'd laughed? Really laughed? "I'll try," I typed back, then immediately felt guilty for the small rebellion. The next morning, David left before dawn with barely a goodbye kiss, a quick peck on the forehead that felt more like dismissal than affection. I stood at the window watching his BMW disappear down our tree-lined street, feeling more alone than I had in months. "He's gone again," Margaret observed from her wheelchair. I'd moved her into the sunroom where she could watch the birds at the feeder David never remembered to fill. "Just for a few days," I said, busying myself with straightening already straight magazines. "Sarah?" Her voice was firm, the tone she'd once used to command respect in the courtroom before retirement. "Sit down." I perched on the edge of the chair facing her, my hands automatically smoothing my faded jeans. I couldn't remember the last time I'd worn something that wasn't chosen for practicality over appearance. "I raised that boy," she said slowly. And I know when he's hiding something. More importantly, I know when someone is slowly disappearing. The words hit me like cold water. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Her roomy eyes were suddenly laser-focused. When was the last time you looked in a mirror and recognized the woman staring back? When was the last time you did something because it made you happy, not because it needed to be done? I opened my mouth to protest, to offer the practiced explanations I'd been giving myself for months, but no words came, because she was right. I had been disappearing, piece by piece, choice by choice, until I'd become a ghost haunting my own life. That afternoon, I met Emma at our old coffee shop downtown, a small act of rebellion that felt enormous. The familiar smell of roasted beans and cinnamon rolls wrapped around me like a warm hug from my former life. "My God, Sarah," Emma gasped when she saw me. "When was the last time you slept?" I slumped into the worn leather chair across from her, suddenly aware of how I must look in my hastily thrown-together outfit and day-old hair. "I sleep. Just not much." Emma leaned forward, her green eyes, so much like our mother's, filled with concern. "This can't go on. You're killing yourself." "She needs me," I said automatically. "David's working so hard to keep the insurance going, and I can't just abandon—" "Stop." Emma's voice cut through my rehearsed excuses. "Just stop for a minute and listen to yourself. You're giving reasons for why everyone else's needs matter more than yours. What about what you need?" The question hung in the air, like incense, heavy and impossible to ignore. What did I need? I'd been so focused on meeting everyone else's needs that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have any. "I don't know," I whispered, and the admission felt like confessing to a crime. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, a stark contrast to my own rough, overworked hands. "Then it's time to figure it out." That evening, as I helped Margaret prepare for bed, she caught my wrist gently. "You saw Emma today." It wasn't a question. Somehow, she always knew. Yes. I waited for the guilt trip, the reminder of how I'd left her alone. Instead, she smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Good. She remind you that you're still alive?" The question was so unexpected, so direct, that I nearly dropped the water glass I was holding. "Mom, I'm dying, Sarah." Her voice was matter-of-fact without self-pity. "We both know it. The question is, are you going to die with me?" I sat down hard on the edge of her bed, her words echoing in the suddenly too quiet room. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking and the distant hum of traffic, the sounds of life continuing while I felt suspended in amber. "I don't know how to be anything else anymore," I admitted. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Then it's time to remember." 3 days into David's trip, everything changed. I was doing laundry, his shirts mostly, since he was particular about the starch, when his iPad chirped with an incoming FaceTime call. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. The name read, Christina Heart Emoji. My world tilted sideways. Christina had been David's business associate for the past 2 years. I'd met her at company functions, a polished blonde in her 30s with sharp suits and sharper smiles. David had always been quick to explain their professional relationship whenever I'd asked about their frequent meetings. The call rang again, then again. Before I could talk myself out of it, I answered, "Hey baby, I missed you so much last night." Christina's breathy voice stopped abruptly when she saw my face instead of David's. For a moment, we stared at each other through the screen, 2 women connected by betrayal and shock. "Oh," she said finally, her perfectly applied lipstick forming a small O of surprise. "Oh," I echoed, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. I should go," Christina stammered, her cheeks flushing pink beneath her makeup. "Yes," I said calmly. You should. After she hung up, I sat in the laundry room surrounded by David's carefully pressed shirts, holding his iPad like it might explode. The air smelled like fabric softener and lies, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, but crack, like ice beginning to thaw. 22 years of marriage, 22 years of trust, of building a life together, of believing in us. And he'd been sharing hotel rooms with Christina while I gave up everything to care for his mother? The tears came then, hot and angry and long overdue. I cried for the woman I'd been, for the dreams I'd deferred, for the trust that lay shattered at my feet. But underneath the grief was something else, something that felt like waking up after a long, drugged sleep. When Margaret found me an hour later, I was still sitting on the laundry room floor, surrounded by tissues and David's expensive shirts. "So you know," she said simply, settling her wheelchair in the doorway. I looked up at her, surprised by her lack of surprise. "You knew?" I suspected. A mother always knows when her child is lying. She wheeled closer, her face gentle but determined. "The question is, what are you going to do about it? If you're someone who's ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered where the woman you used to be disappeared to, hit that subscribe button. Join our Weathered Rose Stories family, a place where women's journeys of strength and rediscovery are celebrated and shared. These stories of resilience have inspired thousands to reclaim their own power. Hit the bell too, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in Sarah's journey of awakening." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, tasting salt and determination. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out." That night, instead of calling David to check in like I had every night for years, I sat with Margaret and we talked, really talked, about her life as a young attorney, about the battles she'd fought in courtrooms and boardrooms when women weren't welcome in either, about the marriage she'd ended when she realized she was stronger alone than diminished by the wrong partner. "I was 35 when I left your father-in-law," she said, her voice steady despite the late hour. "Everyone said I was throwing my life away, but you know what I was really throwing away?" I shook my head. The life that was too small for who I was becoming. Her words settled into my bones like a seed finding soil. Over the next 2 days, while David was still in Chicago doing God knows what with Christina, I started to remember who I used to be. I found my old portfolio from my marketing days, flipping through campaigns I'd created, awards I'd won, testimonials from clients who'd valued my creativity and insight. I called Emma and asked her to stay with Margaret for a few hours while I went somewhere I hadn't been in almost 2 years, the library. I sat among the stacks, reading about women who'd reinvented their lives at 40, 50, 60, and beyond. Their stories filled me with something I'd almost forgotten existed: hope. When David returned from his trip, I was waiting in the kitchen with dinner prepared and the iPad sitting beside my plate. He kissed the top of my head absently, already scrolling through his phone. "How was everything?" "Mom, okay." "Everything was fine," I said, watching him settle into his chair. "Your business trip went well." "Great. The Peterson deal is looking solid." He speared a piece of chicken without really looking at it. "Christina thinks we should be able to close by the end of the month." The casual mention of her name felt like a slap, but I kept my voice level. "Christina seems very dedicated to her work." Something in my tone must have registered because he looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, I slid the iPad across the table. Christina's contact information was still on the screen, her photo smiling up at both of us like an accusation. David's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally a kind of resigned guilt. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked quietly. "Can you explain how you've been traveling with her while I've been here changing your mother's bedpans and sleeping 3 hours a night? Can you explain how you've been building a life with someone else while I've been holding yours together? He set down his fork, his jaw tightening in that way it did when he felt cornered. It's not what you think. What I think, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, is that you've been lying to me for months. What I think is that you've been using me as free nursing care while you play house with your girlfriend. That's not... He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. Christina and it just happened. These things happen, Sarah. It doesn't mean I don't care about you. The casualness of his admission, the way he dismissed years of marriage as, these things happen, sparked something fierce in my chest. Care about me? You care about me the way you care about a reliable appliance, David. As long as I keep working, you don't think about me at all. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up slowly, feeling every muscle in my body protest after months of stress and exhaustion. What's not fair is asking me to sacrifice everything while you sacrifice nothing. What's not fair is lying to me while I've been killing myself to hold this family together. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time in years. I picked up the iPad, holding it like evidence in a trial. I know, David. I know about Chicago, about the hotel rooms, about whatever promises you've been making to her. And more importantly, I know that I deserve better. He stared at me like I was a stranger, this woman who was speaking back instead of simply absorbing his words. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, feeling air fill my lungs more completely than it had in months. I'm saying that at 48, I'm too young to disappear. I'm too valuable to be taken for granted. And I'm too strong to keep accepting crumbs from someone who should be offering me the whole meal. Chapter 2. The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. David's face had gone pale, and for the first time in years, he seemed truly speechless. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking on the wall, the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. Sarah, he finally said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. We can work this out. I'll end things with Christina. We can go to counseling. No. The word came out stronger than I expected, surprising both of us. We can't work this out, David. Because the problem isn't just Christina. The problem is that you've spent our entire marriage making me smaller so you could feel bigger. I walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left a stack of papers earlier that day. Printouts from my research at the library. Notes I'd made while Margaret napped. Articles about women who'd started over, who'd reclaimed their lives after betrayal, who discovered that sometimes losing everything is the first step to finding yourself. I talked to a lawyer today, I said, watching his expression shift from confusion to alarm. I know about the joint accounts you've been emptying. I know about the investment properties you put in Christina's name. I know about the life insurance policy where you made her the beneficiary instead of me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How did you... Your mother helped me understand what to look for. I smiled, thinking of Margaret's shrewd advice that morning. 40 years as an attorney taught her how to follow a paper trail, and you left quite a trail, David. Look, I can explain all of that. You can explain it to my lawyer. I moved toward the kitchen door, then turned back. I want you out of the house by tomorrow evening. You can't just kick me out of my own house. Actually, I can. I held up another piece of paper, the deed to the house that we'd inherited from David's father 5 years earlier. The house is in both our names, but the money for the renovations and improvements came from my inheritance from Dad. My lawyer assures me that gives me grounds to ask for exclusive occupancy during the divorce proceedings. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You're throwing away 22 years of marriage over one mistake. One mistake? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. David, you've been systematically hiding assets and building a new life with another woman while I've been caring for your mother. This isn't a mistake. It's a calculated betrayal. What about Mom? You can't just abandon her. And there it was, the manipulation I'd been expecting. The attempt to use my love for Margaret as a weapon against my own liberation. But something had shifted in me over the past few days. I'd found my backbone, and it felt like steel. I'm not abandoning her, I said calmly. I'm hiring professional care for her, which is what we should have done months ago. She'll have round-the-clock nurses, physical therapy, proper medical support, everything she needs and deserves. With what money? You haven't worked in 2 years. With the money from my marketing business. I pulled out my phone and showed him the email I'd received that afternoon. I called 3 of my former clients today. All 3 want to work with me again. I'm starting a consulting firm. Margaret will be my first investor. The look on his face was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. David had always seen me as dependent, as diminished by my time away from work. He'd never considered that I might have skills, connections, value that existed independently of him. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. I walked to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of wine, a good one that we'd been saving for a special occasion. Tonight felt special enough. I'm 48 years old, David. I have at least 30 good years ahead of me. I refuse to spend them being invisible. As I opened the wine, I heard Margaret's wheelchair approaching from the living room. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in months. Pride. Everything all right in here? She asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what was happening. Everything's perfect, I said, pouring myself a generous glass of wine. David was just telling me about his business trip. Margaret looked at her son with disappointment that seemed to age her another decade. I raised you better than this. Mom, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand that I raised a coward who throws away gold to chase fool's glitter. Her voice carried the authority of a woman who'd spent decades making people face uncomfortable truths. And I understand that Sarah deserves better than what you've given her. David looked between the two of us, perhaps finally realizing that he'd underestimated both the women in his life. This is crazy. You're both crazy. No, I said, taking a sip of wine and feeling its warmth spread through my chest. We're both awake. Maybe for the first time in years. He stormed out then, muttering about lawyers and community property and how I'd regret this. But his words bounced off me like rain off glass. I'd found something in the past few days that I'd lost without realizing it, my sense of my own worth. That night, Margaret and I sat in the sunroom drinking wine and planning my future. She told me stories about the women she'd represented in divorce cases, about the ones who'd thrived after leaving marriages that had been slowly killing their spirits. The hardest part, she said, her voice softer than usual, isn't leaving. It's remembering who you were before you became half of something that was never whole. Who was I asked, genuinely curious. I've been David's wife for so long, I'm not sure I remember. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets and wisdom in equal measure. You were the woman who convinced the Morrison account to triple their marketing budget in a 15-minute presentation. You were the woman who organized the neighborhood fundraiser that saved the community center. You were the woman who could make anyone feel heard and valued just by the way you listened. As she spoke, I felt pieces of myself clicking back into place like a puzzle I'd forgotten I was solving. I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. When was the last time you felt truly seen and valued for who you are, not just what you do for others? If Sarah's story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, I want you to know you're not alone. Share in the comments below. What's one thing you gave up for others that you'd like to reclaim? Your story matters, and this community of incredible women wants to hear it. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not because Margaret needed me, but because I felt energized in a way I hadn't in months. I made coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air smelled like jasmine and possibility. David came downstairs around 8, a suitcase in his hand and his face set in grim lines. He'd clearly spent the night thinking about his options and had probably talked to Christina, maybe even his own lawyer. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said, setting the suitcase by the front door. "We can work out a fair settlement." "Fair," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, let's talk about fair. Fair would be acknowledging that I gave up my career to support yours. Fair would be recognizing that I've been providing unpaid care for your mother while you built a new life with someone else. Fair would be admitting that you've been hiding assets to secure your future while ignoring mine." He shifted uncomfortably, running his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd once found endearing. "Look, I know I made mistakes." "You made choices, David. Calculated, deliberate choices, and now I'm making mine." I handed him a folder I'd prepared earlier. Inside, you'll find copies of everything my lawyer needs: the financial records, the evidence of your relationship with Christina, the documentation of the assets you've tried to hide. You have 2 options. We can do this cooperatively, or we can do this in court. His face flushed red as he flipped through the papers. "You've been busy? I've been thorough. Your mother taught me well." As if summoned by her name, Margaret appeared in the doorway, dressed in the navy blue dress I'd helped her put on that morning. She looked regal, like the formidable attorney she'd once been. "David," she said, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment, "I've made some decisions of my own." He looked up from the papers, wariness creeping into his expression. "What kind of decisions?" "I'm changing my will." She wheeled closer, her hands folded in her lap with calm determination. "Sarah will inherit the house and my investment portfolio. You'll receive your father's tools and the cabin in Vermont." "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. I've watched Sarah sacrifice her own life to care for me while you chased after a woman young enough to be your daughter. She's earned every penny of what I'm leaving her." The cabin in Vermont was worth maybe $50,000. Margaret's investment portfolio was worth closer to $2 million. David's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. "You're both going to regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I'll fight this. I'll make sure you get nothing." "Try," I said simply. "But remember, I have something now that I didn't have before." "What's that?" "Nothing left to lose." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "And that makes me very dangerous." After David left, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows, Margaret and I sat in companionable silence. The house felt different already, larger somehow, as if it had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. "Are you scared?" Margaret asked eventually. I considered the question seriously. Was I scared? Terrified might be more accurate. I was about to divorce my husband of 22 years, start a business from scratch, and rebuild my entire life at 48. But underneath the fear was something else: excitement. Pure, electric excitement. "I'm terrified," I admitted, "but I'm also more alive than I've felt in years." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Good. Fear means you're doing something that matters." That afternoon, I started making calls. First to Emma, who cried with joy when I told her what had happened. Then to my former clients, setting up meetings to discuss my new consulting business. Then to a real estate agent who specialized in commercial properties. I was going to need an office. The hardest call was to Margaret's doctor. I explained that I'd be hiring professional caregivers, that I wanted to make sure she had the best possible care during her remaining months. "Actually," Dr. Martinez said, "I think this might be exactly what she needs. She's been worried about being a burden on you. Having professional care might allow her to focus on living instead of surviving." That evening, as I helped Margaret prepare for bed, she caught my reflection in her dresser mirror. "You look different," she observed. I turned to study my reflection. My shoulders were straighter, my eyes were brighter. The exhausted, defeated woman from a week ago was gone, replaced by someone I was just beginning to recognize. I feel different. Good. She settled back against her pillows with a satisfied sigh. I was starting to worry I'd raised a son who didn't deserve the women in his life. You didn't raise him to be a cheater, Mom. No, but I did raise him to think his needs came first. That's on me. Her eyes grew distant. I spoiled him. After his father died. I thought I was protecting him, but I was really teaching him that other people existed to serve him. The admission hung heavy in the air between us. Margaret had always seemed so confident, so sure of her choices. Seeing her vulnerability made her feel more human, more precious. "It's not too late," I said softly. "People can change. Some people can. Others just get older." She looked at me with eyes that held decades of hard-earned wisdom. "The question is, which kind of person are you going to be?" I thought about that question as I got ready for bed in what felt like a different house than the one I'd woken up in. In the space of 24 hours, I'd confronted my cheating husband, filed for divorce, started a business, and reclaimed my sense of self-worth. At 48, I was starting over. At 48, I was finally waking up, and I couldn't wait to see who I'd become. Chapter 3. 3 weeks later, I stood in what would soon become my office, a bright, airy space on the second floor of a converted Victorian downtown. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm rectangles across hardwood floors that still smelled of fresh polish. For the first time in 2 years, I was wearing something other than practical caregiving clothes. My red blazer felt like armor, but the good kind, the kind that announces your presence instead of apologizing for it. "It's perfect," Emma said, running her hand along the exposed brick wall. "Very professional, but warm. Very you." I smiled, looking around the space that would house my marketing consultancy. In 3 weeks, I'd secured 2 major clients, hired Margaret's care team, and found this office. The woman who'd been too exhausted to imagine a future beyond the next medication schedule was gone, replaced by someone who dreamed in business plans and possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Need to talk. Important." I deleted it without responding. It was the 14th message he'd sent since moving in with Christina. Each one had been increasingly desperate as his lawyer had apparently explained the reality of his situation. Cheating spouses who hide assets don't typically fare well in divorce proceedings, especially when their mother-in-law is a former attorney with excellent documentation skills. "Sarah?" Emma was watching me with the concerned expression she'd perfected during our childhood. "Everything okay? David wants to talk. Are you going to?" I looked out the window at the bustling street below, people hurrying to appointments, living their lives, pursuing their dreams. A month ago, I'd felt separate from all of that, a spectator to other people's ambitions. Now I felt like I was finally part of the world again. "No," I said. "I've said everything I need to say." That afternoon, I met with Margaret's new care coordinator, a warm, competent woman named Linda, who specialized in end-of-life care. We sat in Margaret's sunroom, the 3 of us going over schedules and medication management and all the details that would ensure Margaret's comfort. "I feel guilty," I admitted to Linda, "like I'm abandoning her." Linda smiled with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation countless times. "From what I can see, you've given 2 years of your life to make sure she was never alone. Now you're making sure she has professional care so you can live your own life. That's not abandonment. That's love with boundaries." Margaret squeezed my hand. "She's right, dear. I don't want to be the chain that keeps you from flying." The metaphor was so perfectly Margaret, elegant, literary, and devastatingly accurate. That evening, I was reviewing client proposals when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David standing on my porch, his hands shoved deep in his pockets and his shoulders hunched against the October wind. I opened the door, but didn't. "Invite him in." "Sarah, please. Just 5 minutes." He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was unkempt, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the automatic response to fix whatever was hurting him. Then I remembered Christina's face on that iPad screen, all breathless anticipation for her married lover. "What do you want, David?" "I want to come home." The simple statement hung in the autumn air between us. A month ago, those words might have meant everything to me. Now they felt hollow, like an echo of something that had died. "This isn't your home anymore." "Sarah, please. I ended things with Christina. I told her it was a mistake, that I want to work things out with you." I studied his face, looking for the man I'd married 22 years ago. He was still handsome, still charming when he wanted to be. But I could see something now that I'd missed before, the weakness that masqueraded as confidence, the selfishness that had hidden behind my willingness to accommodate. "Why?" I asked. "Because I love you, because we have a history together, because marriage is supposed to mean something." "Marriage does mean something," I agreed. "It means partnership, it means honesty, it means showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. When did you last do any of those things?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen thousands of times. "Look, I know I messed up, but everyone makes mistakes." "Stop calling it a mistake." My voice was sharper than I'd intended. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is double booking a dinner reservation. Having an affair while your wife cares for your dying mother isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A series of choices. Hundreds of them." "Fine, I made bad choices, but I'm here now, trying to make it right." I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. The evening air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. It felt like breathing freedom. "You're not here because you love me, David. You're here because your lawyer told you how much this divorce is going to cost you." His face flushed, confirming my suspicion. "You're here because Christina turned out to be less interested in a future with a divorced man than she was in the excitement of an affair with a married one. You're here because you've realized that rebuilding your life is harder than you thought it would be." The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of distant traffic and falling leaves. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more honest than it had been in years. "Maybe that's true. Maybe I am here because everything fell apart. But that doesn't mean I don't want this to work." "Want what to work exactly?" I leaned against the porch railing, feeling its solid support against my back. "A marriage where I'm invisible until you need something. A relationship where I give up everything while you give up nothing. A life where I exist to make yours easier." "It wouldn't be like that anymore. I've learned—" "Have you?" I interrupted. "Because 3 weeks ago you were telling me that affairs just happen and that I was being dramatic. Now you want me to believe you've fundamentally changed as a person?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something. Maybe honesty, maybe just the right words to get what he wanted. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I haven't changed. Maybe I'm still the same selfish bastard I've always been. But I know that losing you is the biggest mistake I've ever made." The admission surprised me with its honesty. For a moment, I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. This was the most real David had been with me in years. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "But it doesn't change anything." "Why not?" "If I'm admitting I was wrong. Because admitting you were wrong isn't the same as becoming someone different. And because I've spent the last month remembering who I am when I'm not trying to be enough for someone who never valued what I offered." I looked at him standing there in the porch light, this man who'd been the center of my world for more than 2 decades. I felt sad for what we'd lost, but not sorry for what I'd found. "I'm not the same woman you left taking care of your mother while you built a life with someone else. I'm not someone who's going to shrink herself to fit into the small space you're willing to offer. I'm 48 years old and I'm just getting started. Sarah, please. No. The word came out firm and final. I'm done pleading and compromising and accepting crumbs. I'm done being grateful for the bare minimum. I deserve more than that, and for the first time in years, I actually believe it. I turned to go back inside, then paused. I hope you find happiness, David. I really do. But I'm not going to sacrifice my happiness to make yours easier anymore. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, to the sound of Margaret laughing with Linda in the kitchen. The sound filled me with a lightness I'd forgotten was possible. When I walked downstairs, I found them looking at old photo albums, Margaret telling stories about her early days as a lawyer. "Good morning, beautiful," Margaret said when she saw me. "Sleep well? Like a baby." I poured myself coffee and joined them at the kitchen table. The morning light streaming through the windows made everything look golden and full of promise. "David came by last night," I said. Margaret's smile faded slightly. "How are you feeling about that?" "Surprisingly good, actually. Clear." Linda looked between us, clearly sensing the deeper currents of the conversation. "I should check on your medications," she said tactfully, wheeling Margaret toward the living room. When they were gone, I sat alone, in the kitchen that had witnessed so many scenes of my shrinking life. Now it felt different, not like a prison of routine and obligation, but like the heart of a home where I could breathe freely. My phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. "How did it go last night?" she asked without preamble. "It went exactly as it needed to." "I'm proud of you, you know that." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. "I'm proud of me too." That afternoon, I had my first official client meeting in my new office. The Morrison Group, my old account from before Margaret's illness, wanted to discuss a major rebranding campaign. I sat across from Janet Morrison, wearing my red blazer and feeling every inch the professional I'd forgotten I was. "Sarah," Janet said, leaning forward with genuine warmth. "When you called, I was thrilled. You were always the best we worked with. Sharp, creative, intuitive. We've missed you." Her words washed over me like warm rain after a drought. When was the last time someone had valued my professional skills? When was the last time someone had told me I was good at something that mattered? "I've missed this too," I admitted, "more than I realized." We spent 2 hours discussing strategy, target demographics, and creative concepts. My mind felt sharp and alive in a way it hadn't in months. Ideas flowed like water, and I found myself laughing at Janet's jokes, making suggestions with confidence, feeling like myself again. When the meeting ended, Janet shook my hand warmly. "Welcome back to the world, Sarah. We can't wait to see what you create." Walking back to my car, I called Margaret to check in. "How was the meeting?" she asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It was perfect. I forgot how good I am at this." "I didn't forget. I've been waiting for you to remember." That evening, I stood in my bathroom looking at the woman in the mirror. She looked familiar now. Not the exhausted ghost from a month ago, but not quite the woman I'd been before either. This was someone new, someone stronger, someone who'd been tested and had discovered she was made of sterner stuff than she'd known. I thought about the girl I'd been at 26 when I'd married David, so eager to please, so willing to bend myself into whatever shape would make him happy. I thought about the woman I'd been at 46, so worn down by compromise and accommodation that I'd forgotten I had a spine. And now, at 48, I was someone entirely different, someone who knew her worth, someone who wouldn't settle for less than she deserved, someone who understood that sometimes the greatest love you can give yourself is the courage to start over. Before we wrap up Sarah's incredible journey, I want you to take a moment to reflect on your own life. What dreams have you put on hold? What parts of yourself have you hidden away to keep the peace? Sarah's story isn't just about one woman's awakening. It's about the power we all have to reclaim our lives at any age. If her courage has inspired you, if you see pieces of your own story in hers, please share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do differently if you truly believed you deserved more? Your story matters, and this community of strong, resilient women wants to celebrate your journey too. 6 months later, I stood in front of a mirror in a hotel room in San Francisco, adjusting the collar of a navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. My marketing firm had just won a national award for the Morrison Group campaign, and I was about to accept it at an industry conference. The woman looking back at me was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes. She was a woman who knew her value, who had built something from scratch, who had chosen courage over comfort and discovered that she was capable of far more than she'd ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Watching the live stream. You look like a queen." Another from Linda. "Margaret is so proud. We're all cheering for you from the sunroom." And one from an unknown number that made me smile. "Saw the news about your award. Congratulations. You deserve every bit of success coming your way. David." I set the phone aside without responding. Some chapters of our lives deserve to be closed with grace, not revisited with regret. When they called my name at the ceremony, I walked to that podium with my head held high and my heart full of gratitude. Not for the award, though it was wonderful, but for the journey that had brought me here, the betrayal that had become my liberation, the crisis that had become my awakening, the ending that had become my beginning. "This award," I said into the microphone, looking out at an audience of industry professionals, "represents more than a successful campaign. It represents the power of second chances, the courage to rebuild, and the remarkable things that happen when we stop accepting less than we deserve." I paused, thinking of Margaret watching from her hospital bed. She'd been moved to hospice care the week before, but her spirits remained high. I thought of all the women in the audience who might be living smaller lives than they deserved, who might need permission to dream bigger. To anyone listening who has ever felt invisible, who has ever wondered if it's too late to change course, I want you to know this: it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to reclaim your power, and it's never too late to build the life you actually want, rather than the life you've settled for. The applause that followed felt like validation, but more than that, it felt like recognition. Not just of my professional achievement, but of the woman I'd become. A woman who had faced the wreckage of her old life and had built something beautiful from the ruins. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I video called Margaret. She was tired, but alert. Her eyes bright with pride and medication. "I watched," she said. "You were magnificent." "I had a good teacher." She smiled, the same knowing smile she'd given me that first night when she'd asked if I was going to die with her. "What's next for you, my dear?" I looked out at the San Francisco skyline, at the lights of a city full of dreamers and risk-takers and people brave enough to bet on themselves. 6 months ago, I'd been a ghost in my own life. Now I was a woman with plans, with dreams, with a future that belonged entirely to me. "Everything," I said. "Everything is next." And as I hung up the phone and prepared for bed in a city far from home, I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer the woman who had disappeared into someone else's needs and expectations. I was Sarah, entrepreneur, award winner, survivor, and at 48 years old, just getting started. The best part? I finally understood that I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in the world. I had given it to myself, and that made all the difference. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from a life that's too small for who you're becoming. Sometimes 48 isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your best chapter yet. And sometimes, when you stop waiting for someone else to see your worth, you discover that you've been valuable all along. You just needed to remember how to see it yourself.